It's the 2022 World Cup. It's England's players. Hello and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccerphiles Canada. I'm Kevin and today we'll be looking at England's squad for the 20. We interrupt this mediacast with a bold and slashing edit and a brief introduction to the shortened player series. It's basically the last section of the full-length version. There we examined the formations up until June 2022, and we also went through all of the players who had recently appeared for the national team and judged their likelihood of making the squad, as well as giving information on their history and standing with the squad. But for this media cast, we have washed all that chatter out and we're panning down to the nugget. We hope it incites your interest in the full-length version, the link to which is available in the show notes. So now, joining in progress. So really, it's just Harry Kane. They probably just gave those starts to other players just to get them better. So discussion of the squad. Let's start by reviewing what we said at the beginning, the takeaways from the previous podcast. So we talked a bit about pressure and performance, and not a lot to add to that here. Actually, it's never been an issue in qualifying. They look like a very strong and confident team. But as I said, there were hints of it in the Euro Cup and in the World Cup at times, although they seem to generally overcome those problems. The hints came from being sometimes dull in their play and a bit at a loss of what to do. And then in the penalty shootout, they also seemed, a bit overwhelmed. So that was certainly a problem before the 2014, before the 2018 World Cup, sorry. But as I say, it can sometimes be an issue. Sometimes an issue against teams that they're strongly expected to beat. So I've always myself felt it was a reaction to pressure. There's such heavy expectation upon them by the English media and fans that I think they just kind of froze sometimes and couldn't get their game into action. And as I said, sometimes it was particularly pronounced against teams that they were expected to beat, like Iceland and Hungary in recent games with Hungary. So if that's true, it could be an issue here against USA and Iran. It doesn't really seem to happen against Scotland and Wales that much, but we'll have to see how that plays out. Otherwise, England has a very stable group of players, and they really haven't changed much. Of course, a lot of the players were new for the Euro 2020 squad, but they kind of brought them in quite comfortably, and they really haven't tried out that many new players, and they haven't gotten rid of a lot of players either. So I think that will work in their favor in that the players have been playing together more and more over the last few years and are probably getting used to each other. One of the advantages of not kind of rotating a whole lot of players. Okay, well, if we talk about their club affiliations, of course, they're with many of the top clubs in England, but they've always been criticised for not really branching outside of England very much, so they're a bit insular there. But we have all the top clubs represented: Manchester City, Man United, Tottenham, Chelsea, Arsenal, and Liverpool. And then from some of the smaller clubs, although most of them come from those clubs, but we do have representation from Everton and Crystal Palace. I think each of those have two players, and Southampton, West Ham, like that. However, we do have a few players playing abroad there. So we have Jude Bellingham playing with Borussia Dortmund, and we saw that Jadon Sancho came back from abroad there. And we have Tammy Abraham playing with Roma and Fikayo Tomori playing with Milan, all of them doing quite well with those teams. So they may be out of the kind of the consciousness, the weekly consciousness of English fans, but they're definitely candidates on this squad based on their play with those teams. Now, if you've listened to other podcasts, you'll see I'm kind of trying to put together a bit of a statistical analysis here. So we'll see how it's going. And one of the things I consider is how many players they've called up since 2020, the total number of players. So so far we've seen that especially Ghana and USA particularly have called up so many players that they have a bit of a rotation problem or selection problem. So they have close to 70, which seems to be a confusing number. The average is 52 and England has 45. So as I said before, not calling in every player who has a good bit of form. It's kind of hard to get onto the England team, and you have to have a bit of sustained form to do it. And that's good because it gives a chance for the players who are selected to play together more often. Well, I'm going to move next to talk about the total players that are definite and likely. And for England, that's 21 players. So let me see how that compares to other teams. This sometimes gives an indication of how tight the team is, because players or teams with a low number here tend to have players who are playing together on the field more often, so it makes the team tighter. If there's a huge number of players here, it means they're switching in and out quite a bit. So the players are kind of always playing with a different group of players. So 21 is good. It's slightly above average, and it suggests a fairly tight group of players for England. The other category is how many players are under consideration. So this is definite, likely, and possible. And it doesn't really indicate much in itself, but it does tell us how many players they have to cut. So basically, they're allowed to bring 26 players to the Cup. That may return to 23 in future tournaments, but I suspect it won't. Anyway, 26 players for this Cup. And unlike the Euro Cup, where they could only bring 26 players, but only put 23 players on the bench. In this case, they're allowed to put all 15 players on the bench. And total players under consideration is 35. So that basically means they'll have to cut 9 of the players that we talked about today. And if we look at the definite and likely categories and use that as a guide, it would mean that they can basically add 5 of the possible players that we talked about here. So it's going to be a difficult decision. Now, they will put out a preliminary squad of 55 players, and they have to use that roster if they want to replace any injured players shortly before the Cup, like that. So we'll also kind of see the top 55 candidates, which will probably include some new players, since we only have 45 under consideration here. But in terms of the final selection, Gareth Southgate has a few disappointed souls to deal with, because he's basically got to cut 9 of the players that we saw in the possible, probably in the possible category here, but perhaps some of the definite or likely will surprisingly not make it to the Cup. Okay, a couple of other stats in terms of average age. England's, so this is also just among the definite, possible, and likely players. The average age is 25.7, and not much to remark on there. It's on the young side. The average is somewhere between 25 and 27, and the average is 26.3. So they have a slightly younger squad. And when I looked at the the actual breakdown of that, we see that they have just 4 players who are over 30 and none who are over 32. So Kyle Walker and Jordan Henderson are 32, Kieran Trippier is 31, and Nick Pope is 30. That's pretty young. I mean, that's not that many senior players. For some teams, that could indicate that they maybe need more veterans on the team, but that doesn't seem to be the case for England. And then at the other end of the scale, we'd have just one player who's under 20 years old. That is Jude Bellingham. But we do have 6 players, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 players who are 22 years old or younger. So that kind of accounts for them being slightly younger than most teams, but it's not really significant. In terms of average cap per player, they have 23.9, so about 24 caps per player. And let me see what the average is there. It's a bit below average, as most teams have 26, or the average right now is 26.2 among the teams I've done so far. So again, not really a significant difference there, but it does suggest a bit of a younger squad. I'll give you a moment to think about who you think has the most caps on the team. And now I shall answer. It is Raheem Sterling with 77 caps. Maybe people would have chosen Harry Kane. He's second with 73. Henderson 69, Kyle Walker 68, and other players have less than 60. And among players who have less than 10 caps, we have 10 players who have less than 10 caps. So 10 of the 35 in that category. So again, slightly less experience than other squads, but not to a worrying degree, as they have plenty of players with experience. In terms of goals, the team total is 113 among the players that are under consideration, and that works out to 3.3 per player. I'm still trying to understand and improve this stat because I'm not sure how much it really means, but so far to me it kind of means that they score more than average, because the average total for teams is 104, and then the average goals per player is 3.4, so they're slightly below that. You can make of it what you will. But generally, it suggests they're a scoring team. Now, for England, they are a scoring team, much more in qualifying than in the Cups. Sometimes they're quite defensive in the Cups, but if they play a weaker team or have a good game, they can certainly score a lot of goals. But I would suggest most of their goal scoring is. What I mean is they tend to be a more scoring team in qualifying than they are in the Cup. And that's because they're more expansive and open in qualifying, whereas when a Cup comes, they sometimes get a bit defensive. Okay, we'll move on to players and issues to watch. So starting with the defense, Pickford, is he going to be the starter? His form is not as good as before, but he kind of has held on to a place. But Ramsdale started the last 2 games, and Nick Pope's form has become very good, so he might make a comeback onto the team. And I wouldn't be surprised, to be honest, if they did try another goalkeeper during the Cup. My guess is that Pickford will start, and if he does well, he'll continue, but if he doesn't do well, he may be replaced by, I think it's going to be Ramsdale or Pope, but we'll come to that. The next issue in defence is at the right back position. Do they go with a kind of a more defensive right back like Kyle Walker, or a more offensive right back like Trent Alexander-Arnold? And we said during the long podcast that he seems to prefer the more defensive the more defensive Kyle Walker. However, he may have found a good balance in Reece James, who has come into the team more. So it'll be interesting to see what they do over on the right side. On the left side, it'll just be interesting to see who they pick. So the players they've been going with, Luke Shaw basically had the position, but now seems to be losing it. Ben Chilwell, and then right winger Kieran Trippier, both making a bid for it. But it seems to be in a bit of flux right now as to who will actually be in that position. In the midfield, that's where they're going to have to cut some players. There's no real issues, and the defensive midfielders are pretty stable with Declan Rice and Kevin Phillips, but in the more attacking midfielders, it seems like that's where they're going to have to cut some of the players. In the attack, a definite issue would be, is there an over-reliance on Kane? I suppose it won't come to a head unless Kane gets injured. But the problem with Kane starting so many of the games is that they haven't really given much field time to whoever's going to back Kane up. And there doesn't seem to be a really strong candidate right now. So that's the other issue in attack is, are there really suitable candidates to back Kane up, or, to come in as substitutes or to come in as a second forward? We saw that they've only ever had one centre forward, and that may be because there aren't a lot of candidates. So they have a few candidates who they've kind of tried and dismissed. So like Ollie Watkins, Patrick Bamford, Callum Wilson, Dominic Calvert-Lewin, have all kind of come and gone, maybe not completely gone. Marcus Rashford too. And I think there is a chance for Marcus Rashford to come back onto the team. I even think a couple of unused players like Ivan Toney could be selected. Mikel Antonio used to be a possible candidate, but now he's committed to Jamaica. He's played World Cup qualifying games for them, so he is cap-tied. But Ivan Toney has also been approached by Jamaica, and he refused, hoping to get onto the England team. And given his form recently and the lack of candidates in this position, I think he might appear in the September games. In fact, one of my sources did say he made an appearance in the National League games in June, but I couldn't verify that by more than one source. So anyway, he kind of is a consideration, even though he hasn't been mentioned in this podcast. All right, let's take a look at some of the new players for England. So we have in central defence a couple of new and younger players. Mark Guehi, we won't do the bio on them because that is in the longer version of the podcast, but he is 22 years old and plays for Crystal Palace. Fikayo Tomori is doing well over in Italy. He's not so young, he's 25 years old and has been on the team since 2019, but really has come into the picture fairly recently. Midfielders, we have Conor Gallagher, who is 22 years old and has played 4 games. He's with Chelsea in England. Jared Bowen also has 4 caps. He's not young, actually. He's 26 years old, but he's pretty new to the team and had a good season with West Ham. I think it'll be form that will dictate who's chosen, and we might get an outside player like Ivan Toney coming in. Emile Smith-Rowe is an attacking midfielder, new to the squad, but actually didn't play in the last 4 games, so he'll be in a bit tough to make the team. And Oliver Watkins, or Ollie Watkins, fairly new to the team, but has 7 caps and 2 goals, although he is not a young player either, 26 years old, but fairly new to the English setup. Moving on to injuries, we don't really have any to speak of. We have a couple of players coming back from injury. Chilwell, I think. I have it in my mind that Kyle Walker is another player coming back from injury, but he wasn't injured for any of the games as far as I recall. But anyway, nevertheless, they're both back. Same with John Stones, who seems a bit absent in my mind, but perhaps just because he hasn't been selected to play for Man City. But kind of coming back into the picture. Notable absences, well, we don't really have any veterans for England who have retired in over the last couple of cups. I would say the closest thing to a notable absence here is Marcus Rashford, who was, fairly firmly established on the team, but hasn't played since the Euro Cup in 2020. And Danny Welbeck actually was a great servant for England from 2011 to 2018, but wasn't selected after September 2018, but still active as a club player and playing well for Brighton. And given the lack of forwards, I think there's an outside chance for both of these two players. All right, well, we're going to finish with the going through the squad and predict the starters. So my prediction is that Gareth Southgate will be there. I'm going to put him as a definite candidate. Jordan Pickford, I am not so sure about, but I guess I'll put him as the starter because he has the starting position and would be kind of insulted to lose it. But I think there is a bit of competition there, and I think he could lose it easily if he doesn't perform well. But we'll pick this up in September in the update podcast and maybe have a bit more clarity on it. It looks like Nick Pope and Ramsdale will be the backup keepers here. Again, we'll cover any surprises between then and our update podcast. Harry Maguire is actually losing a bit of form, and I think he's played as a starter for England a bit less. And the same might be said of Connor Cody, actually. I don't think the form is really that great. I think Maguire will make the squad, and Stones will make the squad, but I'm not really convinced that they'll be starters. However, I think it's the most stable backline. I wouldn't be surprised if they start the early games, but especially players who come in good form could kind of quickly replace them. And Connor Cody likely to make the cut, but I think his form will be important over the next while. I'm kind of shining a bit on Fikayo Tomori here as maybe a bit of a surprise starter. Okay, left back, as we said, is a very difficult position, and really, I wonder if Kieran Trippier, I'm just going to copy his name up here. I wonder if Kieran Trippier, who we have as a likely candidate, is going to be the player to do it here, because he's playing that position for his club team and sometimes plays that position for England. But I'm not confident enough to say that any of them will be a starter. So, I think Trippier will be a starter somewhere on the field, not necessarily as the left back. But I won't put him as a starter here. I'll put him as a starter below here. Luke Shaw and Ben Chilwell. I would give the nod to Ben Chilwell right now, but I really can't say. It might be a right midfielder moving over, which they have sometimes done. Right midfielder, my feeling is that Reece James is going to be a starter, not necessarily as the right back, but perhaps as a right midfielder or even as a left back. But I also think Kyle Walker is going to be a starter as well, because Gareth Southgate seems to like him and he seems to value his defensiveness over Trent Alexander's kind of offensive abilities. He doesn't seem to favor Trent Alexander-Arnold in that position, has actually not used him in that position, but more as a midfielder. Defensive midfielders, Declan Rice and Calvin Phillips. Well, I think Declan Rice is definitely a starter. I think Calvin Phillips is likely a starter, but I'm not confident enough to say that right now. But I think he will be selected for sure, and kind of a 50-50, depending maybe on the setup that they use. Central midfielders, we have Jude Bellingham and Phil Foden, but I wouldn't see either of those as starters. And I have to go down the list quite a while to find a starter here. But the next one I see is Raheem Sterling, one of their stars, one of their biggest stars, who will for sure be a starter. But I can't say the same of Jack Grealish in terms of my confidence in him as a starter. Right winger Bukayo Saka. Well, we saw that Phil Foden started as the right winger in the cup, but Gareth Southgate seemed to prefer Saka, and I think he's going to be a starter. But I wouldn't be surprised if Phil Foden starts instead. But there we have it. Mason Mount, his form has not been good recently, but I think for England he's a starting player. Again, maybe switching positions based on the formation they use. And the only forward who we define as a starter is Harry Kane. So yeah, I didn't really talk about substitutes here, and I'm going to skip that because it would be a bit of a long discussion. But I would say, basically the players who are listed as likely here will either be starters or substitutes, and then really just a handful. We saw that there's only room for a handful of the possible candidates to make it in. All right, well, that brings us to the end, and thank you for listening. Keep in mind that we're going to be doing an update as soon as new information comes out, and that'll probably be in early November, maybe early to mid-November. I'd like to do it not when the teams publish the preliminary roster, but when the final roster is decided upon. So keep an eye on us at Soccerphiles Canada. That's Soccerphiles with a PH in the middle and an S at the end. And our website, which is soccerphilescaptivate.fm. But you can find us other ways by typing Soccerphiles into Google or Soccerphiles Canada, or the show notes, which I've been working on increasingly, have links to lots of good stuff, including timestamps and other podcasts that are related to this one. So thanks for listening, and see you next time. Bye-bye.